The Benko gambit is a dynamic response to 1d4, which enables black to play for the initiative right from the beginning of the game. This luxury does not come free of charge, and black has to sacrifice a pawn. But I hope to be able to show in this small investigation that the pawn is a small price to pay for the initiative that black gets in return. Now, in fact, the origins of the gambit lie in the games of Opochenski, Lundin and Stoltz, innovators from long ago. You might be surprised to learn that the first game we're going to look at was played in 1939. And it's very instructive because it shows the Benko gambit in embryonic form. Now, in fact, this game is between a Dutch international master called Van Scheltinga, and he's playing Opochenski. Now, the move order you see before you is actually the modern move order, the way into the Benko gambit. But we're going to have to retract a couple of moves to actually get the precise move order played in Van Scheltinga Opochenski, because in those days they were just experimenting, and the best move order for black had not yet been discovered. So we're going to have to go all the way back to c4, and in fact in the game Opochenski played g6. Okay, knight c3 by Van Scheltinga, and now black played the typical Benoni move c5. And of course white has choices here, but the modern master, and even in those days, would in general prefer the space gaining move d5. d6 by black. Van Scheltinga played e4. What could be more natural than that? Take the centre. And now black plays the flanking blow b5. So here we see the similarity with the Benko gambit. And of course black's initial idea is that of course white can't take on b5 with the knight. Well, he can, but then he loses the pawn on e4. That's the point of b5 in this position. But it's a genuine sacrifice, and white took the pawn. I mean, why not? You know, if this is the first time you're seeing black's move, you could be forgiven for thinking it's quite a silly idea. You know, black's just giving up a pawn for no good reason. Why not take it off? I'm sure that Van Scheltinga felt that way at that time. You know, he's done nothing wrong, so why not take the pawn? Okay, bishop g7. White sticks with natural development. Knight f3. Black castles. And now bishop e2. And that's a move that looks slightly peculiar to modern eyes, because black's plan in this position is basically to go a6 and then, if allowed, to take on b5 with the a pawn. So black's plan is to go a6 and then to take on b5. At that point, white will probably want to play bishop takes b5. So when he moves the bishop on f1 early, he's kind of losing a tempo when we consider that sequence. So for instance, if a modern master ever reached this position, he'd probably prefer moves like a4. The point of which is to just delay the development of the bishop on f1 for as long as possible, so that if black plays a6 and goes through with his plan, white can take on b5 in one go. So for instance, a modern player, I mean there are many moves here, modern players would consider moves like bishop d2, just simple development, or even rook a3, stuff like that. Just getting the pieces out, keeping this bishop at home. So you can kind of say that the move bishop e2 already dates the game. We can see that it's one of the original games, because the guy with white has got nothing to go on. He's just improvising, and so he thinks to himself, well, I better get castled against this stuff and carry on. But of course after that, black plays a6, and now if black ever gets to take on a5, a6 on b5 in this position, then he's going to be gaining a tempo. Alright, well, Van Scheltinga castled. I guess the other move is a4 here. And then you can see what I mean, because black takes on b5 immediately, and white's choice is restricted. He's got to take with the bishop. He can't take with the a pawn because there's a pin on the a file. And of course, if he takes with the knight, then his e pawn's hanging, and that's not a good deal for white, really. So bishop takes b5, bishop a6, and you can see what I mean about the tempo gaining operation by black. White doesn't really want that to happen. So Van Scheltinga castled. Alright, A takes b5, bishop takes b5, and now black brings his queen out to b6. Okay, he need not have done that, but he sets up the immediate threat of knight takes e4 in this position because white's pieces are slightly unstable. Okay, knight to d2, and now bishop a6. So here we see the contours of the modern Benko gambit taking shape. Black sacrificed a pawn. In return, he's got two open queenside files. He's got easy development for his pieces. He's got a fireproof pawn structure, and he's got a nice safe king there, tucked in behind his fianchetto bishop. So all sorts of positional compensation for the pawn. And I guess around here that white was starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable because, you know, probably he didn't believe black's pawn offer initially. The way that black is playing is almost forcing white to believe, you know, that black is actually making a sound sacrifice here. And with bishop a6, black is starting to exert pressure. So it's not all that easy for white already, this position. Okay, well, knight came to c4. Traditional Benoni idea, put the knight on c4 and try and pin black down. But this is a slightly different position to, for instance, a modern Benoni, because in the modern Benoni there'd be no black pawn on e7 anchoring the pawn structure. So the knight on c4 would, for instance, be attacking a pawn on d6. Well, here that's not the case. And Opocensky simply moved his queen out of the way. No big deal. The bishop on b5 is now attacked again. Okay, bishop takes a6. Third time this bishop has moved. Not ideal. Queen takes a6, putting pressure on c4. And now I'm pretty sure in this position that white's next move is probably a mistake. Queen e2. Main reason being that's a slightly unstable location for the queen. Let's see if we can find an improvement. Well, knight e3 would be one improvement here. It's difficult to precisely say what white's move should be, but that move looks more solid to me. The configuration of the white pieces here has a slightly unstable look. The pieces are hanging by a thread, and you know, black can easily build up the pressure against white's queenside, and this is exactly what he does over the next couple of moves. With, for instance, knight bd7, bishop came out to e3, and now rook fb8. And show a modern player the opening 10 moves of this game, and he could immediately say, well, this is not a modern game. This is a game from the 40s or 30s or something. But if we showed him this position, he wouldn't be able to tell whether this was a game from 1935 or 2005, because this is a typical Benko position. And here you see a tableau, a typical position where black has fantastic pressure on the queenside files, this easy development I was speaking of, and the initiative. And as I said in the introduction, that's a pretty small price to pay for a pawn when all the pieces are on the board. So I dare say in this position that Opocensky was starting to feel that his opening had been a complete success. And black is certainly putting the pressure on here. Well, in such situations, mistakes occur. I'm not saying white's next move is a mistake, but it's very passive. Rook a b1. Funnily enough, we'll see later on in the DVD that the modern interpretation with white often features rook b1. But whether or not that's good connected with the move e4, we'll discuss a bit later on. E2 e4 is often quite a dangerous move to play for white in the Benko gambit accepted, funnily enough. Rook a b1 looks passive. Again, if we go back, it's hard to see. It's hard to see decent moves for white because somehow his pieces are all in poor locations. Maybe if pushed, I might suggest rook fe1, or going back, maybe h3. But it's hard to say. It's really hard to suggest good moves for white here. I really like the black position, actually. So rook a b1 was played anyway. And now knight e8. Well, how modern is this move? You know, this is another key idea in the Benko gambit, rerouting the knight via c7 up to b5, exchange off the knight on c3, and then the pawn on b2 becomes exposed. So a game from 1939 showing all the modern ideas. Well, this is very interesting stuff. Rook fe1. Yeah, I genuinely think that Van Skeltinger doesn't know what to do. So he's just trying to make natural moves and hope that his position hangs together. I suppose the major point of that move was to protect the queen. But it's a blunder. And it's not immediately obvious that it's a blunder, but a blunder it is. And I wonder if you can see why. Okay, bishop takes c3 was a surprising reply. That's an easy move to miss, of course, because it's unstereotyped. Black gives up the fianchetto bishop. He'd never normally do that under any circumstances. But here, believe it or not, Black's actually winning a piece. So if we go back to 98, I mean, again, White should and probably would have preferred, with hindsight, bishop d2, protecting the knight. But let's see this. So bishop takes c3, because it is quite unusual. And I'm sure that White was ever so slightly surprised by this. Rook takes b1. And Van Skeltinger resigned in this position. Resignation on move 18, because he suddenly realised after rook takes b1, just simply knight e5. And there you see what I meant about the unstable location of White's pieces. He's losing a piece out of nowhere. So resignation it was, a convincing win for Black. And an old game, but a very good way to begin our investigation into the Benko gambit.